Morning.
Mm.
So, my topic is about surgeries of craniovertebral junction anomalies. So, welcome for this talk. It's an amazing time in which, in a very strange period of our lives, when some of our colleagues are struggling and fighting against a major pandemic, we are here in a cozy environment in which we are trying to best utilize the time and get together. It's amazing to see more than 90 of you getting together from various parts of the world. Thanks, Naren, and thank you all for making this happen. So we are having a different kind of feeling now, and part of it is the grief and anticipatory grief of how this pandemic will go ahead and how it will affect our practice. So this is one way to utilize our best time in a productive way, and we'll see recapitulating what we have learned and sharing the knowledge so that it will benefit further. So if we see the classification of craniovertebral junction anomalies, as this is the standard in which Menezes has put forth many years ago, basically it's congenital and developmental and acquired conditions. Congenital anomalies are the malformations of the occipital bone, atlas, and axis. It's a very detailed classification. And developmental includes acquired conditions and developmental anomalies like errors of metabolism, Down syndrome, infections like Grisel syndrome, secondary basilar invagination due to osteomalacia and other causes. So like this, it's a very extensive classification. What we generally see will be like this. We'll have to keep this as our classification, CV junction anomalies as bony anomalies and soft tissue anomalies. So bony anomalies can be traumatic and can be congenital. So the congenital variety are for some reason quite common in this part of the world, that's India and Southeast Asia. Trauma is the hallmark of trauma is that the anatomy is most likely symmetric, whereas in congenital, the hallmark is that it's asymmetric, right to left asymmetry will be there. And we should never forget soft tissue abnormalities, which comes in the form of Chiari-1 malformation with or without settings. So this is working classification for most of the cases. So if we say anomalies, like should we operate all these cases is a big question. So the treatment for this will be conservative in some cases. We should always remember that if we see some anomaly in radiology for a patient, which may be incidental, it's not always an indication to operate. So, like Professor Goyal says, there's a new thought process which is going on to say whether should we actually call this anomalies, alterations, or variations. So, is it an nature's way to protect the neural structures by manipulating the anatomy there during development to create a way in which the neural structures are optimally protected? So there is, we don't know the cause why this happens, especially the congenital variants, the asymmetric variants. And one of the probable cause is the C1, C2 instability, as Professor Goyal says. So always keep in mind that though we generally call it as anomalies, this may be an alterations or a variations, and not all of this will require surgical treatment. So coming to the clinical features, the symptoms generally these people present with neck pain, occipital headache, basilar migraine, isolated hand or foot weakness, sleep apnea, sensory paresthesias, dysesthesias, very bad dysesthesias, uh, lower cranial nerve problems, dysphagia, aspiration pneumonia, tinnitus, hearing loss, which is generally reported in the West, not so much do we see in India. Vertigo. The classic presentation is a progressive spastic quadriparesis. So these are some of the unusual presentations in which periodic vertigo when the patient turns the head to one side, which may be due to rotational occlusion of vertebral artery, presenting with intermittent giddiness on turning head. So this patient has presented with cerebellar infarct. So other classic signs are like this, as in this boy we are seeing, neck tilted to one side, head tilt, short neck, webbing of the neck. And in the face, there are many features. There may be synorphis, the both eyebrows coming together, coloboma of the iris, different in color of the iris, cleft palate, cleft lip, micrognathia, So webbing of the neck, Sprengel shoulder, nystagmus, most usually downbeat nystagmus and lateral gaze nystagmus, scoliosis I can see here, other features of skeletal dysplasia, supernumerary nipples, supernumerary fingers, digits, quadriparesis, paraparesis, or monoparesis. And during examination, keep in mind to check for the neck height ratio. The neck will be small in these patients typically, and the single breath count will be compromised, which will have a bearing on indication for surgery and what extra care we need to take during surgery. So some classical radiological signs of basilar invagination I'll be touching upon. This is of historical interest as well as practical utility. Most of you would have heard about this lines, Chamberlain's lines from posterior margin of hard palate to opistheum. Basilar invagination is present if tip of the dens is above 3 mm above this line. McGregor's line is similar again to show how much of dens is invaginated. Macrae's line across the foramen magnum. Beckenham's clival canal line is very important, easy to find out along the slope of the clivus and any dens protruding above suggests invagination. Claws index. And another thing is this Welch's basal angle to show if this is more than 130. Are you seeing my tip of my arrow? Yeah, that's the basal angle. If it is more, that suggests platybasia, bimastoid line. Nowadays, with the advent of 3D CT scan with reconstructions, we can virtually walk around this area, and all those radiological lines which were earlier very important during the X-ray era are most of the time obsolete because it will be very obvious when we see the uh, this kind of reconstruction, which will also help in our surgical planning. You can see the anatomy of the vertebral artery too, which will have a bearing on where we place our screw when we are surgically correcting it. So what are the steps when we operate at the craniovertebral junction for anomalies? First, identify the pathological process. It's a group of conditions. It's not a single entity. So a pathological process is different in every individual case. We have to correct the subluxation or malalignment. We'll have to decompress and then stabilization using and fusion. Standalone onlay bone graft techniques itself will give a good fusion rate. However, the stability is not immediately conferred. So it requires some sort of implants to place the bone in position till the bone fusion occurs. So we should remember there is a diverse anatomy. Etiology in each case is different. There's no standard of care. You have to individualize the treatment. And it's actually an art of stabilization. It's not one technique for all. And you say evolution of craniovertebral junction surgery, it doesn't mean the old technique is something obsolete. It may be the best one for a particular case. So we should consider it as a toolbox like of C1 lateral mass screws, C2 pedicle or pars or laminar screws, occipital screw plate system in some cases. So it's a toolbox, and we should see which is the ideal to be used in a given patient. So I will go through some of the indicative cases because, as I said, it's a varied anatomical malformations. So we'll go through some of the cases to touch upon various aspects what we should consider. Asymmetry, as I said, is a hallmark of congenital abnormalities. As you can see in this, see the extent of basilar invagination. We generally see the sagittal images, but we also have to see the coronal section to see the asymmetry from right to left. So the strategy will be different from right compared to right to the left. So this is what the fusion we have done. You are seeing there's no C1 lateral mass, it's assimilated. So we have used the occiput here, and it's not symmetric on both sides. You see the asymmetry, how much of asymmetry is there from right to left. And once it is done, the patient was all right for some time. And as you can see, the asymmetry is even there in the implant position, one from occiput to C2, other from C1 lateral mass to C3. So he presented later with swallowing difficulty due to persistent basilar invagination, increased crowding after 6 months. and the cause was found to be dysphagia because of acute angulation lower down. So even though the upper part is well in position and the basilar indentation is moderately reduced, the occlusion here is dysphagia here is because of the acute angulation. So we took care of the subaxial spine by including that in the construct. And once we corrected, so this was the angulation which corrected the basilar invagination as well as the acute angulation in the subaxial spine. He is perfectly well now. The bone effusion has happened. Remember that person with the Bow-Hunter syndrome, that boy who presented with cerebellar infarct had this picture, and there was a total complete occlusion of V4 segment of vertebral artery. We use C1 C2 distraction and fusion, including the occiput in this case. But 4 days later, he again developed a breathing difficulty, again due to acute angulation of the subaxial spine, which was again corrected using subaxial extension of the construct in a second surgery. We have to understand the anatomy, pathophysiology after taking a detailed history. This lady remembered she had fallen many years earlier, and if you can notice here, uh, this is the part of C1 lateral mass, which is gradually prolapsing in between the condyle, occipital condyle, and C2. You see the convex surfaces which is abutting uh, from the condyle and C2 lateral mass uh, and C2, and the C1 is fractured and it is prolapsing anteriorly. So this is what has happened. And unless you understand this anatomy, you will have difficulty in finding out what's the best approach. So this has caused the invagination of the dense basilar invagination. So we have to distract that, put a stout spacer with bone graft in the middle, and then fix it in position. And you can see the extent of reduction in basilar invagination. The dense has come down. New goal in craniovertebral junction surgery is not just preventing further deficits or complications. We have come to a time in which we are trying to preserve the function as well as to reverse the neurological deficits. As in this young engineer who presented with diplopia, his scan showed very unusual finding of syringobulbia and extending as syringomyelia lower down with the basilar invagination. This is the extent of invagination you are seeing, atlantaxial dislocation. And once we reduced that and fixed, putting spacers in C1, C2 joint, he had good reduction. And to our surprise, his diplopia got reversed and his syringomyelia totally disappeared. So it is not unusual to see cases in which these deficits as well as the radiological findings reverse. Professor Goel reports many such cases in which not even those which are apparently skeletal, like torticollis, gets reversed in a very short amount of time post-operatively when appropriate correction is done. Syringomyelia is another aspect where our theory has changed, our outlook has changed because of our understanding. So this is foramen magnum decompression done in 2011 for KD1 malformation, but she presented again in 2016 with worsening of syrinx. It was not a usual case in which we expect a basilar invagination, but however, because the syrinx has worsened, we had taken up for second surgery and fused the CV junction, C1, C2 fixation, and she had significant reduction in syrinx. The improvement in symptoms will be much earlier, and as you can see, the syrinx has reduced so much after the second surgery. This is another girl in which we took her up for C1, C2 fixation in the first instance because she had a very ripened syrinx, so big, and somewhere else she was advised for a syringo-subarachnoid shunt. What we did, we didn't touch anything there, but we went up ahead. We are seeing the crowding here, and we did a foramen magnum decompression as well as C1, C2 fixation. This is 1 year later, 6 months later, there was a streak of syrinx, whereas 1 year later, she's perfectly normal. And if you can see, the syrinx has totally disappeared. Amazing, dramatic results like this are achievable. So, persistent syrinx, think of C1, C2 fixation as a solution. And again, coming to anatomy, this lady had a stout occipital condyle And as we can see here, we are seeing the C1 which has prolapsed anteriorly in between the condyle and C2. So our work here is to bring back this C1 into position. We had some cadaveric studies those days and no case report, uh, but this was looking appropriate, and we used it as a lever and reduced it back to position. And this the bone graft which is placed, and she came in a moribund state, but now able to walk after one fixation has
तुमने अलग कुछ किया नहीं था?
So now looking at complications, what are the expected complications and how to avoid it? Vertebral artery injury, venous bleeding, these are the very dreaded complications of craniovertebral junction surgery. Misplaced implants, implant failure, CSF leak, progressive quadriparesis, respiratory distress, dysphagia, C2 hyposthesia, infection meningitis. We should never forget infection as one of the cause for any worsening post-op in this area. So, what are the tools and techniques? We generally think of the high-end techniques like navigation, endoscope, 3D printed models, virtual simulation, like this. But in my opinion, this is the order in which we have to consider the techniques and strategies to reduce the complications. The first one comes in positioning. So there are many different ways to position. What we follow is using a fixed head in a Sugita frame. So we'll have to take care. We have to put the leads for physiological monitoring beforehand in supine position. Check that signals are good, and then we'll have to turn prone with the help of quite a many people. It's not a simple job. It's a very important aspect of surgery. This is where teamwork comes into play. It's not an individual person's work. So this is my team at Narayana Health. You can see Dr. Kiran, Dr. Satyanarayana, and the entire team here. So, in decision making as well as during surgery, and one more surgeon who is there who will give an opinion from the opposite side will have a bearing on perfect placement. That's much better than having a navigation system, is our opinion. Intraoperative neuromonitoring is indispensable in these cases. In many cases, once we do a decompression, we can see immediate improvement in the in the response in the graphs. Vertebral Doppler is another important tool where we see distal flow in the vertebral artery before we finalize the position of implant so that there's no inadvertent occlusion of the vertebral artery. Endoscope helps in some cases, as in this case in which we have put endoscopically with minimally invasive positioning of the odontoid screw so that it is in perfect position. 3D printed model helps in certain cases, as in this girl who had a C2 lesion in which first we went posteriorly and fixed it and got a biopsy which showed a very rare tumor called as epithelioid sarcoma. Then we took a 3D printed model, waited giving chemotherapy, but she started worsening. That's when, with using this model, we devised an anterior technique in which we have split her mandible, went through by splitting the tongue, and had a idea of custom-made implants to place anteriorly in between those posterior screws. But we couldn't get this implant in time, but we could devise a technique in which we could place mini plates and of this 3D printed model also helps in giving a good clearance laterally because we are holding the model in hand and we know where exactly we are when we are under the microscope. We'll be lost otherwise. We took a fibular graft and vascularized flap graft, which was anastomosed to facial artery, and then recreated odontoid and placed it in position. This is the picture finally, and she underwent radiation postoperatively. Excellent postoperative cosmetic result too. She underwent radiation postop. She developed a D8 metastatic lesion 1 year later, which responded well to radiation again. She is doing well. So 3D printed model has its advantages in not just in teaching to devise an optimal surgical exposure and also to devise a custom-made patient-specific implants. So as I said, the virtual reality simulation of the particular patient will give the exact positioning of the screws. That's another technique to avoid complication. And the anterior technique also has some evolved over time in which we can avoid complications by reducing the extent of resection by using a flap and then tailoring the resection of hard palate so that the postoperative palate related complications get reduced. So this is another lesion in this area, which is an anecdotal case. As you can see here, we were surprised once we went inside. We should, in tropical countries, we have to keep infection as a cause of pathology in craniovertebral junction. And can you guess what this is? This she had hundreds of hydrated cysts in that location. So to conclude, so we'll have to look at complications because first thing which comes to our mind when we think of craniovertebral junction surgery is how to avoid complications. Teamwork, learning from cases which has worsened, understanding the anatomy and biomechanics, and to incorporate useful neuroadjuncts. These are the ways in which we can do a successful craniovertebral junction surgery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prasad. That was an excellent lecture on a very complex area. It was very erudite and scholarship and also great cases. I'm just going to, while we are waiting for any questions, Professor Gaul it's an honor to have Professor Gaul in our audience. Professor Gaul, do you have any comments, please? Prof. Gaul? Any of you have questions for Dr. Prasad? Professor Gaul is coming in. Professor Gaul?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Naren. Congratulations to you both, Naren and Komal, for organizing this wonderful course. I'm sure many young and not only young, everybody of us will learn and get a lot of information on the subject of spine. Best wishes to all of you.
Thank you, sir.
As regards Komal, this was a wonderful authoritative, I will call it a very authoritative presentation from you.
Thank you, sir.
And there are, as you know, there are several issues that involve the craniovertebral junction.
Yes.
The issue of instability is the main and the primary issue.
Yes, sir.
Atlantoaxial joint being the most mobile joint of the body is the most unstable joint of the body. I can only say that atlantoaxial instability is very poorly understood in the current form. It is very poorly understood. And there are a whole lot of more understanding that is necessary on the subject of atlantoaxial instability. And atlantoaxial stabilization means a very strong stabilization, as you have shown with various techniques that you have adopted. As far as I am concerned, for a lot of time, I don't do occipital inclusion of the occipital bone in the fixation construct. I have completely avoided.
Yes.
The other thing that I have avoided is completely transoral decompression for issues regarding craniovertebral junction instability. Instability means stabilization. So that is the way I work on it. And stabilization, as you know, craniovertebral complications of craniovertebral junction surgery can be quite devastating. So we have to learn this subject very nicely, learn this subject very elaborately, learn the anatomy of the region very perfectly. And if we have to put screw in the C1, if we have to put screw in the C2, we have to know the anatomy absolutely masterly. And to do these operations is not without any little risk. They are quite complex surgery. But if you can do them properly, you instantly give new life to the person. Yes. And they do not have malignancy or tumor or that, and they will live all their life normally. So these are beautiful operations. I will suggest that all the young people watching this program must learn and must do this operation very beautifully, and there is a big potential of giving new life to the patients. So thank you very much for asking me to comment on your beautiful presentation, Komal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naren. Thank you.
Professor Goel. There's a question from Dr. Patil. Dr. Patil, do you want to just make you unmute you just a second?
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, Patil.
I just wanted to ask, like, in all these cases of CV junction anomalies, preoperatively, when we look at the CT scan, when we see any bony anomalies, for sure we want to get a CT angio to know the course of the vertebral artery. Apart from the course and the dominance of the vertebral artery, is there any other information we want to get from it? And the second question is, without any bony anomalies, is CT angio to be done in all cases of CVJ, irrespective of what the diagnosis and the pathology is?
I understood, Patil. It's a very good question. It is very intuitive to think that CT angio is required in all the cases, and for good reasons. As you said, it gives a level of confidence. First is you'll see the dominance, and you will know which side is bigger. That's the most important thing. And the second part of your question is like, is it mandatory in all cases? May not be. If I have it, it will be definitely a good addition, but it's not required in all the cases what I believe. But definitely it gives you an element of confidence when you're operating. And always remember, when you see a vertebral artery, not to get scared. There will be a buffer. Or vertebral artery is covered with venous plexus all along. And when you see vertebral artery, what you have to concentrate more in a CT is the bony structure. How much of bone do you have? Vertebral artery may be close, but still it's away because there's a buffer in between the vertebral artery and the groove, which is filled by the venous plexus.
That's great, thanks. And just one more question, if that's okay. It's a question from Dr. Arun. And there's another question, Dr. Prasad, if you can answer it on the chat box, then everyone can see it. Dr. Arun, do you want to go ahead, please?
Yes, sir.
Please ask Dr. Komal your question, thanks.
Good afternoon, sir. I just wanted to know what is the cost that one 3D model adds to the surgery vis-a-vis the advantage that we gain by doing it?
3D model is not for all the cases at present. It's something which is upcoming. There was a time when MRI was very expensive and not for all the cases, but its cost has come down. We have known its utility. Over time, I foresee a future in which it becomes widely available, the cost comes down, and for whatever little incremental benefit, it will be worth using it in most of the cases. But as of now, it is not worthwhile looking at the cost and benefit, but very soon it's going to be economical because there are a lot of players who are making these 3D models. And once it is freely available, we will find more utilities in this new modality to keep a 3D model next to you when you're operating.
Okay, thank you, sir.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dr. Prasad. That's a question from Dr. Rusha Cheda. If you can please answer it on the chat box. That's a very
so I
good
saw that how much purpose does a flexion extension or dynamic CT or X-ray serve in making a plan for surgery? Very important to see flexion extension, X-ray. Dynamic CT I will do selectively, not in all the cases. If there is a suspected instability, but you have not proven it using an X-ray, sometimes I will get a dynamic CT, not in all the cases. Especially much more important is the C-arm, what you do intraoperatively, to see how much of reduction has happened, how much of difference compared to the preoperative X-ray. So that's much more important. But flexion extension is a must. Especially you should keep in mind when you're operating on a syrinx, on a Chiari malformation, because there may be sometimes mobile atlantoaxial dislocations which is overlooked unless you see a flexion extension X-ray.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prasad. I'm very grateful. Fantastic lecture and questions. And if you have any further questions to Dr. Prasad, please put it on the chat box. Thank you, sir.
Some questions, I will answer that. Thank you.
Thank you.